Welcome back to the Morph Your Mind podcast. Before we get started, I'd like to thank our title sponsor, Nova 3 Labs. If you want to save some money on some of the best quality performance supplements on the market, you can use the discount code podcast15 to save yourself some cash on that order, and you can do so at nova3labs.com, and that 3 is the number 3. So this week, we're going to be getting right into a very important topic and something that I think is very fitting in the modern age of social media, where we're kind of exposed to perfection on a regular basis. And today's topic is about self-love and self-esteem. And the perspective that I want to take on this is specifically as it relates to self-confidence, or our confidence in our abilities to successfully execute on plans or goals that we may have for ourselves. And I find that a lot of very capable people kind of get stuck and aren't really making forward progress because they don't believe in themselves enough to actually just take that step or take action. And there's a really fitting quote that I saw recently. There was an interview with Coach John Kavanagh, who's a mixed martial arts coach. He's actually Conor McGregor's coach, so a lot of people know of him through that. But he was asked who he believes the toughest fighter in all of MMA right now is, and he responded simply with, whoever makes the walk into the cage. And I think that that's really fitting to actually, use on ourselves, especially when we may lack confidence or we're going through periods of doubt, where it's important to understand that anyone who is willing to put themselves out there, anyone who is willing to step up and actually take risks or take chances, anyone who's out there who is trying to grow and develop and better themselves instead of simply staying where they are, those people deserve respect. Those people deserve admiration. And if that person's you deserve to love yourself and be confident in yourself because of those actions. So for those of you who may be struggling with confidence in your abilities to do things, maybe you've hit a couple stumbling blocks, or you've made some mistakes or had some failures and you don't really know how to rebound from that, or you're sitting there thinking that you're not good enough moving forward, or you don't have the esteem or the self-worth to continue to press on. Think back to that quote and understand that just by nature of you putting yourself out there, just by taking those risks and taking those chances, you've already differentiated yourself from a lot of other people in the world. You're already worthy of respect and esteem just for taking those risks and taking on those challenges. And so I know a lot of our listeners, a lot of you who have listened to this podcast on a regular basis, you're the type of people who take risks. You're the type of people who take chances. And by doing that, you need to understand that you are worthy of respect and you are worthy of that love. And it's important to start with yourself. And there's a very powerful thing that we have the ability to control, and that's really our attitude and the narrative, our personal narrative that we tell ourselves in our mind. So there's a constant chatter that goes on through our mind on a daily basis. There are words and sentences that are always being played over and over, and that has an incredible effect, a profound effect on our ability to succeed or fail, or our ability to really do anything. And a lot of us may not even be aware of that narrative. We may not be aware of what is actually going on inside our minds. And if we are unaware, it's very easy for that to turn negative and for that self-talk to go to a negative place, because confidence is hard. It takes practice. It takes practice to feel prepared enough to be confident. And a lot of times when we lack that preparation, or when we're unsure, then that voice in our head can become negative. And so the first thing that I want you to really do, the first exercise this week, is just start to gain some awareness over that voice in your mind, over that personal narrative that you're telling yourself on a day-to-day basis whenever you face something difficult. And it's very easy to tell when something goes not according to plan, or goes, is a challenge that you face. Maybe this happens to me all the time. If I'm doing something and I spill something on the floor, or I knock something over, it's very easy for me to go to a negative place as soon as that happens. And I have to stop myself often and change that narrative in that situation and understand that, it's just something small or something simple, and I have the ability to fix it immediately. So when you face challenges in your day-to-day life, just become aware of what your default reaction is. Be aware of what that voice in your head is saying. And as much as you can, try to kind of interject and jump in if you see it trending negative, and try to shift that to a positive place. And just by taking control over that narrative, you start to take control over your own story. And that will allow you to take control of your confidence in situations moving forward that are challenging for you. And there's a lot of self-esteem issues that stem from that. And, it's difficult in the modern world, especially with social media, because everything is always in our face. We're so interconnected. It's easy to perceive the lives of others as being perfect and to try to convince ourselves that no one else has any problems. And that can contribute to this lack of love for ourselves, because we see our struggles and our hardships, and we compare that to these images that we're bombarded with, or these people we're seeing, and we feel that, we must not be adequate, or we must not be worthy if everybody else around us is living this perfect life. And it's important I actually don't know where this quote came from, but one thing that I heard about social media that I think is really fitting, and it's always something I try to remind myself of on a regular basis, is social media essentially allows us to compare the highlight reel of somebody else with our practice footage, right? So if you're an athlete, and this used to happen a lot, because as an athlete, when I was competitive, I was training, I had a lot of, you have a lot of good days, but you have a lot of bad days, especially if you're pushing yourself and trying to be competitive in whatever sport you're pursuing. And it's difficult sometimes to see videos that people are posting online of heavy lifts or things that they've accomplished or successes that they've had, especially when you have a string of bad training days in the gym, or you have a string of days where you don't feel 100%. And it's important to remind yourself that a lot of those things that you're seeing out there are the highlight reel of those people you're watching, and their actual day-to-day life is much more similar to yours than you could imagine. And so try to take a step back, especially with things like social media, and try to look at things for what they are, try to see through the illusion, and use those opportunities to remind yourself that, that's what you're looking at, and that doesn't necessarily mean that you aren't better than that individual, or you don't live up to that individual. And you can also look to people who you idolize or people you look up to, and try to understand their life story or their journey, because a lot of people have failed many more times than we may realize, especially people who are successful have gotten there because they've been willing to make mistakes and they've been willing to put themselves out there. And a lot of it just boils down to ultimately changing your perception of failure and changing your perception of what it means to make a mistake. And I think a lot of people have this finite definition of failure. It's like, all right, I tried that, I failed at it, and now I'm on to the next thing. And it's important to turn that on its head a little bit and redefine failure as not an ending point, but as a starting point. It's the ability to start again with new information. And there's a famous quote from Henry Ford that I think really fits well here, in that he said, failure is just an opportunity to begin again, but this time more intelligently. And if you give yourself permission to fail and permission to make mistakes, and you use them as learning opportunities, and you understand that it's not the end of something, but the beginning of something else, I think a lot of times that can help with our self-esteem or our love for ourselves, because we give ourselves that permission to fail, or we give ourselves that permission to make those mistakes and to learn and to grow, because all of those successful people who we look up to, all of our idols, have gone through that same process. They've failed countless times. And the last thing that I'll say on that note about failure that I think is really funny, and something that's important to keep in the back of your mind, is most of the time we are not worried about failure itself, but more the perception of our failures, and that's what affects our self-esteem. So look back to the last time that you did something embarrassing. Maybe you spilled something on yourself, or you tripped, or whatever. You did something in public that is generally embarrassing. We immediately look around, right? We look to see if anybody noticed, if anybody else saw. And what happens if nobody saw, right? The first thing we do is we breathe that sigh of relief and we go about our business.
So it's not the failure itself that was the problem. That's not what was embarrassing to us. A lot of times we already have given ourselves permission to make mistakes. It's only when we perceive that somebody else has seen it and we think that they're judging us or that they're looking down on us for that failure that it becomes embarrassing, that it becomes problematic. So understand that we all go through that same struggle. We're all human beings. It's just part of our psyche. It's part of our psychology. And if you can kind of switch that up, if you can give yourself permission to fail and you can understand that it's just the perception of that failure that is really bothering you and bringing down that self-esteem and that self-worth, that can let you change that and evolve and grow and learn that those are positive opportunities instead of negative opportunities. So hopefully all of these tools can help you start to repair that relationship with yourself, but it really starts and it really boils down to understanding that dialogue that's going on in your own mind. Start to gain control of that. Start to give yourself permission to fail, and you will slowly start to grow and evolve and learn to just have a little bit more love and a little bit more confidence for yourself moving forward into those different situations in your life.